The air inside the Vinorian Council chambers felt alive, pulsing with energy from the gathered alien factions. The atmosphere shimmered faintly, as if the room itself held its breath. Ethan Calder stepped inside, his polished boots clicking on the obsidian floor. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the weight of 100 curious gazes pinning him in place. The chamber smelled of ozone and brine, a sharp tang that stung his nose. Ethan could taste the tension hanging in the air, thick and unyielding, like the moments before a storm broke. Rows of floating platforms, each filled with delegates from countless alien species, formed a vast amphitheater around him. Their eyes, some glowing, some flickering, some entirely alien, tracked his every movement, dissecting him with the intensity of predators sizing up their prey. "Ah, the human," a cold, metallic voice broke the silence. Ethan turned to see the Zorvan envoy, a towering figure encased in gleaming silver armor, its face a polished black visor that reflected Ethan's uneasy expression. The Zorvan didn't speak with words, but emitted perfectly modulated sound waves, translated by the Council's neural interfaces. Predictably late, humans do struggle with punctuality. Ethan suppressed the urge to roll his eyes. "It's not lateness. It's called making an entrance," he said, flashing a grin that he didn't feel. The Zorvan's visor tilted slightly as though considering his words for flaws. Behind the Zorvan, the Thalrix delegation stirred, their fluid forms rippling in the low gravity of their platform. Their leader, Ambassador Calith, radiated waves of visible pheromones that shimmered in the chamber's artificial light. The scent intensified, a cocktail of salt and decay that made Ethan's stomach churn. The Thalrix communicated in an intricate dance of chemical signals and flowing movements, each ripple and color shift carrying layers of meaning. Calith's voice slithered through the translator in soft, mournful tones. "This is the mediator you bring us? A warm-blooded creature of such limited senses? Pathetic." Ethan forced himself to remain calm, though his palms were slick with sweat. "I might not have your pheromones or your algorithms," he said evenly, "but I'm here to make sure this room doesn't turn into a war zone. So maybe let me do my job," the chamber murmured with faint amusement. Ethan knew he had already lost points with the Zorvans and Thalrix. "Great start, Calder," he thought. "They probably think you're just a loud ape." A metallic chime echoed, silencing the room. At the center of the chamber, a holographic map of the disputed region flared to life. The image showed a vast, glittering ocean planet, the Thalrix homeworld, Rilthana, surrounded by Zorvan outposts in tight, angular orbits. The boundary lines shimmered in red, marking contested zones. "Let the negotiations commence," the neutral Vinorian mediator intoned from their elevated dais. Their translucent, jellyfish-like body glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the words. "The Thalrix will present their grievance." Calith surged forward, her gelatinous body elongating as her voice filled the chamber. "The Zorvans have violated our sacred waters. Their soulless machines drill into our ocean floors, desecrating sites older than their cold, lifeless logic can comprehend." Her words hung heavy with grief, amplified by a surge of briny pheromones that made Ethan's throat tighten. The Zorvan envoy responded without pause, its voice slicing through the chamber like a blade. "Emotional nonsense. These waters are strategically vital for resource extraction, essential to maintaining galactic infrastructure. The Thalrix's reliance on superstition cannot dictate interstellar policy." Ethan leaned forward, catching something in Calith's form, a flicker of red at her edges. A color Ethan had learned represented despair in Thalrix culture. Her anger wasn't just righteous fury, it was fear. "Enough," Ethan interjected, his voice calm but firm. "You're both laying out problems, not solutions. Let's focus on why we're here, keeping this from escalating into full-blown war." Calith turned to him, her translucent eyes narrowing. "And what does a human know of our pain? Your kind, so newly arrived to the stars, cannot grasp what we have lost." Ethan held her gaze, letting the weight of her words settle. He thought of Earth, of its wars fought over rivers and oceans, of the countless lives lost to disputes over water. "I know more than you think," he said quietly. The Zorvan envoy tilted its head again, its tone sharper now. And how does humanity propose we address this issue? With your emotional instincts? Ethan exhaled, frustration prickling at the edges of his composure. You know what? Yeah, emotions. Because here's the thing, you can't logic your way out of this. And you, he pointed at Calith, can't solve it with pheromones. So how about we start with common ground? The chamber went silent. Ethan scanned the room, noting the flickering expressions of amusement, skepticism, and faint curiosity. The Thalrix shimmered with shades of amber. Confusion, if he remembered correctly. Common ground? Calith's voice dripped with doubt. Let me ask you this, Ethan said, stepping closer to the holographic map. What do these waters mean to you? Beyond emotion or logic? What's the core of it? Calith paused, her form rippling as if trying to find the right translation. They are life, memory. To touch the waters is to touch our ancestors, our essence. Ethan turned to the Zorvan envoy. And you? What's the core reason you need these resources? Efficiency, the Zorvan replied instantly. They are necessary for sustaining galactic stability. Without them, entropy accelerates. Ethan let their answers hang in the air, watching as the chamber shifted, murmurs growing louder. So you both agree, he said finally, that these waters represent survival. For one, it's about heritage. For the other, it's about the future. Different perspectives, same goal. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then the Zorvan envoy's visor tilted slightly downward, as though conceding a point. Calith's form flickered between shades of amber and green, a tentative shift toward understanding. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. We're not solving this today, he said, addressing the room. But if we can agree on that shared goal, survival, then we have a foundation. And that's where we'll start tomorrow. The chamber buzzed with low murmurs, and the Venorian mediator pulsed softly, signaling the session's end. As the factions began to retreat, Ethan lingered, staring at the holographic map. Human. The Zorvan envoy's voice cut through the quiet. Ethan turned to see the reflective visor hovering just inches from his face. Your methods are primitive, but intriguing. We will see if they bear fruit. Before Ethan could respond, Calith approached, her voice softer now. You tread water, human, but tread carefully. The depths hold dangers you cannot imagine. As they departed, Ethan stood alone in the vast chamber, the map glowing faintly before him. He rubbed his temples, the enormity of the task settling heavily on his shoulders. Day 1, he muttered to himself, and I'm already in over my head. Behind him, the Venorian mediator floated closer, their voice a low hum. The tides are shifting, Ethan Calder. Be careful you are not swept away. Ethan glanced back, swallowing hard. He could almost hear the distant crash of waves. Real or imagined, he couldn't tell. One thing was clear, this was only the beginning. The Venorian council chambers had emptied, leaving Ethan Calder alone with the holographic map of Rilthana and its contested waters. The glowing lines of the disputed zones blinked like a warning light, and the quiet hum of the room pressed against his ears. He leaned against the edge of the dais, staring at the shimmering projection. Survival, he muttered to himself. They both want it, but they can't see past their own damn lenses. Ethan's comm unit buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He tapped it, and the calm, synthesized voice of his assistant AI, MIRA, chimed in. Session summary uploaded. Tensions remain high. Suggest additional preparations for tomorrow's negotiations, MIRA reported. Thanks, Mira, Ethan said with a sigh. Also add, don't drown in alien politics to my to-do list. Noted, MIRA replied dryly. Ethan swore he could detect the faintest trace of amusement in the AI's tone, but it was probably just his imagination. He stepped out into the city of Venoria, the capital's vast, glittering sprawl illuminated by bioluminescent streetlights. The air was cooler now, carrying a faint metallic tang that made his skin prickle. Above, Layers of ships crisscrossed the sky, their lights blinking like artificial constellations. Ethan walked briskly, the sounds of alien conversations, a mix of clicking, warbling, and melodic hums, filling the air around him. Despite the relative calm of the city, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral out of control. The day's session had cracked open the surface of the problem, but it hadn't gone nearly deep enough. Both the Thalrix and the Zorvans were still entrenched in their perspectives, and neither seemed inclined to move. Back in his temporary quarters, Ethan poured himself a glass of something resembling water, but with a faintly greenish hue. The accommodations were efficient, but alien. Every surface too smooth, every light too cold. He sank into a low, gelatinous chair that adjusted to his body weight with a disconcerting squish. "All right, Mira," Ethan said, setting the glass down. "Let's review everything we know about the Thalrix and the Zorvans. I need something, anything, that can bridge this gap." The holographic interface on his desk flared to life, displaying files on both factions. Mira's voice accompanied the scrolling data. Thalrix, an aquatic species with a communal culture, communication primarily through pheromones and fluid motion, deeply spiritual connection to their oceanic environment, viewing water as both life and legacy. Current leader, Ambassador Calith. Emotional and intuitive, she is considered one of the more moderate voices among her people. Ethan rubbed his temples. "Moderate, huh? Could have fooled me with all that righteous fury today." "Shall I continue?" MIRA asked. "Please do." Zorvans, a technologically advanced, logic-driven species. Communication relies on algorithmic language and harmonic frequencies. Their societal structure prioritizes efficiency above all else, often at the expense of cultural or emotional considerations. Current envoy, Representative Zintha, known for strict adherence to protocol and disdain for emotional arguments. Ethan leaned back, his mind churning. The problem wasn't just the dispute over resources. It was the fundamentally incompatible ways the two factions viewed the universe. The Thalrix's world was built on feeling, history, and connection, while the Zorvans saw everything as a series of inputs and outputs. "How the hell am I supposed to bridge that?" he muttered. The next day's negotiations began with a familiar tension. The Thalrix delegation shimmered with hues of deep blue, their morning pheromones thick in the air. Ethan had begun to recognize the subtle shifts in their colors and scents. Blue was sorrow, red was despair, green was caution. It was like watching a living tide pool, constantly shifting, but always interconnected. The Zorvans, by contrast, were as unyielding as ever. Representative Zintha's visor glinted under the chamber lights, her posture rigid. The low mechanical hum of her speech filled the room. "Let us not waste time with theatrics today," Zintha said. "Our calculations show that prolonging this dispute reduces efficiency by 12.7%. Let us proceed to resolutions." Calith rippled with flashes of red and yellow, anger and warning. "Resolutions? You speak as though this is a mere transaction. Your machines desecrate our ancestors' resting places. You cannot reduce our pain to numbers." The chamber crackled with tension. Ethan could almost feel the pressure building, like an electric storm about to break. He stood, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Let's take a step back," he said, his voice firm but even. "We're not going to solve anything by shouting past each other." "Your perspective is irrelevant, human," Zintha said coolly. "Your emotional reasoning will not sway logical analysis. And your logical analysis will never address the Thalrix's concerns," Ethan shot back. "That's the point. You're both so caught up in proving each other wrong that you're missing the bigger picture." The chamber fell into a tense silence. Ethan took a slow breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been reading up on your histories," he began, his tone measured. "Calith, your people hold water as sacred. It carries the memories of your ancestors, right?" Calith's rippling slowed, her body softening into a more neutral blue. "Yes. To touch the waters is to touch our past." "And Zintha, your people see water as a resource, something essential to sustain the future, correct?" That is accurate, Zintha replied. Water is a critical component in maintaining galactic stability. Ethan nodded, stepping closer to the holographic map. So here's what I see. One faction values the past, the other values the future. But both of you care about survival. That's your common ground. The chamber murmured with faint interest, though skepticism still hung in the air. Calith shifted toward a cautious green, while Zintha's visor tilted slightly, as though processing Ethan's words. "And what do you propose, human?" Zintha asked. Ethan hesitated, the weight of their scrutiny pressing against him. He didn't have a full plan yet, but he knew he needed to keep the conversation moving. "For now, I propose we stop thinking in absolutes," he said. "Calith, your people feel the Zorvans have desecrated something sacred. What would it take to make amends?" Calith's form shimmered with hesitation. A restoration of the desecrated waters, a commitment to leave them untouched. Zintha's visor flared faintly, a sign of disagreement. "I calculate a 0% probability that such a demand will be met. It is inefficient and illogical." Ethan raised a hand. "And what about you, Zintha? What's non-negotiable for the Zorvans?" "Continued access to resources," Zintha said simply. "Anything else jeopardizes stability." Ethan nodded, the pieces of the puzzle starting to form in his mind. "All right, that gives us something to work with." Before he could elaborate, a chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the end of the session. The delegates began to retreat, leaving Ethan once again alone with the weight of the problem. As the chamber emptied, Calith approached him, her form glowing faintly with curiosity. "You speak boldly, human, but words will not be enough." "Then I guess I'll have to find actions to match," Ethan replied. Her colors deepened to a contemplative green before she turned and flowed away. Ethan watched her go, a knot of determination tightening in his chest. The stakes were rising and he was running out of time. As he left the chamber, Mira's voice chimed in his earpiece. "Progress report, minimal." "Thanks for the optimism," Ethan muttered. "Let's hope tomorrow goes better." But as he stepped into the cool Vinorian night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were still ahead. Ethan Calder paced the length of his quarters, his mind spinning like a cyclone. Outside, the bioluminescent streets of Vinoria glimmered under the alien night, but the beauty of the city was lost on him. The delicate balance between the Thalrix and the Zorvans was slipping through his fingers, and he was running out of ideas. "Okay, think, Calder," he muttered to himself. "You've got one faction drowning in their past and another that won't look past a calculation. How do you get them to meet in the middle?" Mira's holographic form flickered into view on his desk. "You appear agitated. May I remind you that stress has been statistically proven to impair problem-solving?" "Gee, thanks, Mira. You're a real motivational speaker," Ethan replied, rubbing his temples. "What I need is inspiration, not a lecture." "You may find inspiration by revisiting humanity's own history of conflict resolution," Mira suggested. "Or by sleeping, which you have neglected for—" "Noted, Mira," Ethan cut in. He stared at the desk's glowing interface, where files on Earth's water disputes and resource wars were displayed. The parallels to the current crisis were clear, but the methods humans had used to resolve those conflicts—diplomacy, treaties, sometimes outright bribery, seemed ill-suited to a situation where the very concepts of emotion and logic were at odds. Ethan slumped into his chair, which adjusted with a faint squish. His thoughts drifted to Earth, to the tales his grandmother used to tell him. She'd always said that the best way to resolve a fight was to make both sides see what they had in common. And if they couldn't see it, you had to show them. "Show them," he murmured, an idea sparking to life. He leaned forward, tapping the console to bring up the holographic map of Rilthana's contested waters. "Mira, highlight the desecrated zones the Thalrix are mourning." The map flared with patches of red, scattered across the ocean's surface like bloodstains. "Now, overlay the Zorvan extraction sites." A new set of glowing marks appeared, clustering near the red zones but never directly overlapping. Ethan frowned. The Zorvans had avoided the most sacred areas, but their operations were close enough to provoke the Thalrix. The proximity was a ticking time bomb. "What if," Ethan muttered, his fingers tracing the edges of the holographic zones. "What if we found a way to make them see this as more than just a line on a map?" "Your phrasing is vague," Mira said. "Please elaborate." Ethan grinned, the beginnings of a plan taking shape. "Not yet, Mira. First, we need to get everyone back in the room without them killing each other." The next day, Ethan arrived early at the Venorian Council chambers, the tension already palpable. The Thalrix delegation shimmered with hues of green and yellow, caution and warning, while the Zorvans radiated an almost mechanical stillness, their rigid forms exuding disapproval. As Ethan took his place, the Venorian mediator pulsed faintly, signaling the start of the session. "The human mediator has requested this additional meeting. Proceed." Ethan stood, his voice steady but urgent. "I know we've been going in circles, but I think there's a way forward. I need both of you to see something." He gestured to the holographic map that now hovered in the center of the chamber. "This is what you're fighting over, but let me show you what you're not seeing." The map shifted, the glowing zones transforming into a vivid, three-dimensional simulation. Ethan had worked all night to piece it together, a visualization of the Thalrix waters from both perspectives. The sacred sites shimmered with ghostly blue light, rippling like waves, while the Zorvan extraction zones were represented by sleek, angular structures. The simulation brought the conflict to life, showing the proximity of the sites, the delicate balance they shared. Calith's form rippled with shades of blue and green as she watched. "What is the purpose of this display, human?" "Perspective," Ethan said. He turned to the Zorvan envoy. "Zintha, look at those extraction sites. You avoided the most sacred areas, didn't you?" "Of course," Zintha replied, her visor tilting slightly. "We are not reckless. But proximity is irrelevant to the Thalrix's emotional outbursts." Ethan ignored the jab. "And Calith," he said, facing the Thalrix leader, "your people feel like the Zorvans are desecrating your waters, but they've actually been trying to minimize the damage even if it's not perfect. Doesn't that mean something?" Calith's form shimmered uncertainly, her colors shifting between amber and green. "Intent does not erase the harm done." "I'm not saying it does," Ethan said quickly, "but what if you could both work together to protect what's sacred while still meeting the Zorvans' needs? There's enough ocean for both of you. You just need to collaborate." The chamber fell silent. The Thalrix delegation murmured among themselves, their pheromones filling the air with a faintly sweet tang. The Zorvans remained still, their logic-driven minds processing the proposal. Finally, Zintha spoke. "Collaboration is inefficient. Cooperation introduces variables and reduces control." "Yes, it's messy," Ethan admitted, "but it's better than destroying each other. And it's the only way you're going to survive. Isn't that what you both want?" Calith's form stilled, her colors deepening to a thoughtful green. "Survival," she murmured, the word almost a sigh. "But what would this cooperation entail?" Ethan smiled, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. "That's what we're here to figure out, together." The negotiations that followed were fraught with tension and setbacks. The Thalrix insisted on reparations, their sorrow palpable as they described the damage to their sacred waters. The Zorvans countered with cold, calculated offers, dismissing the emotional weight of the Thalrix's demands. Progress was slow, and more than once Ethan thought the talks would collapse entirely. But bit by bit, cracks began to form in the factions' defenses. When the Zorvans proposed a joint effort to restore the damaged sites, in exchange for expanded extraction zones elsewhere, Calith hesitated, her form shimmering with cautious acceptance. And when the Thalrix suggested sharing their ancient knowledge of water currents to improve Zorvan extraction efficiency, Zintha's visor dipped in what Ethan could only interpret as a nod. By the end of the day, a tentative framework for cooperation had emerged. It was fragile, like a bridge of glass, but it was a start. As the session adjourned, Ethan lingered in the chamber, staring at the holographic map. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see Calith, her form glowing faintly with shades of green and blue. "You are persistent, human," she said. Perhaps more so than we expected. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, we're stubborn like that. Stubbornness can be a strength, Calith said, her voice softer now. But it can also be a weakness. Tread carefully, mediator. The tides are not yet calm. Before Ethan could respond, Zintha approached, her metallic voice cutting through the air. Your methods are inefficient, human. Yet, they produce results. We will see if they hold. As the two leaders departed, Ethan stood alone once more, the weight of the day's progress settling on his shoulders. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step forward, and in this fragile, alien world, sometimes a single step was all it took to change the tide. The morning sky over Vynoria was a tapestry of swirling lights, ships weaving through their endless routes in synchronized chaos. Ethan Calder stood at the edge of the council chambers, the holographic map of Rilthana still glowing faintly before him. The fragile framework of cooperation established the day before felt as delicate as glass under a hammer. Today would test whether it would hold or shatter. His breath frosted in the crisp morning air. Vynoria's automated systems kept the atmosphere cool to accommodate its myriad species, but the chill felt sharper today. Ethan's mind buzzed with the weight of everything riding on this session. The Thalrix's grief, the Zorvans' logic, the lives on both sides. It was all balanced precariously on a bridge he had barely begun to build. "You're up early," Mira chimed in his earpiece, her voice faintly teasing. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "Too much at stake." Statistically, lack of sleep reduces cognitive efficiency by 14%, Mira said. "Perhaps you should have rested." Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. "I'll sleep when I've saved the galaxy. Now let's run through the plan again." The holographic map shifted, displaying the key zones of contention. Ethan had spent the night refining his proposal, a shared ritual to symbolize the first step toward reconciliation. It was ambitious, blending elements from both cultures, the Thalrix's tidal dances and the Zorvans' harmonic frequencies. If executed properly, it could be the turning point they desperately needed. If it failed, well, he preferred not to dwell on that. The council chamber buzzed with low murmurs as the delegates assembled. The Thalrix shimmered in hues of green and blue. Caution mingled with hope, while the Zorvans remained rigid and silent, their reflective visors betraying nothing. Ethan took his place at the center, the weight of their scrutiny pressing against him. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady, despite the tension crackling in the air. "Yesterday we took a step forward. Today we take another. I prepared something that I believe can help us solidify this fragile peace." Zintha's visor tilted slightly, her tone sharp. "Elaborate, human. We have no time for theatrics." Ethan suppressed a smile. "It's not theatrics. It's perspective. I propose a symbolic ritual blending elements from both cultures. A demonstration of unity, not just words on a treaty." Calith's form rippled with shades of curiosity. A ritual? What would such a thing entail? Ethan gestured to the holographic map, which shifted to display a stylized representation of the ritual. "The Thalrix will contribute their tidal dances, a sacred expression of connection to the waters. The Zorvans will provide harmonic frequencies to enhance the ritual's resonance, a reflection of their logical precision. Together, it will create something neither could achieve alone." The chamber murmured, the idea sparking a mixture of intrigue and skepticism. Zintha's visor flared faintly, a sign of processing. "Your proposal is inefficient. Rituals waste resources and yield no tangible benefit." Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's not about efficiency, it's about trust. Symbols matter. They bridge gaps logic alone can't. And trust me, if humans have learned anything, it's that sometimes a shared gesture can do more than 1,000 negotiations." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Ethan could feel his pulse hammering in his ears as he waited for their response. Finally, Calith spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "We will participate, human, if only to honor the memories of our ancestors." Zintha hesitated, her visor reflecting the glowing map. "Logical analysis indicates a low probability of success. However, the potential benefits outweigh the risks. We will comply." Relief washed over Ethan, but he knew this was only the beginning. The ritual would require both factions to work together in real time, something they had never done before. And if even one side faltered, the fragile peace could crumble. Preparations began immediately. The Thalrix delegation set to work designing their tidal dance, their fluid forms gliding across the chamber in intricate patterns. Their movements were mesmerizing, ripples of light and color cascading through their bodies like waves. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of awe watching them, their connection to their environment so deeply ingrained it felt almost otherworldly. Meanwhile, the Zorvans calibrated their harmonic frequencies, their precision almost unnerving. Machines hummed as they adjusted each tone to perfection, their cold efficiency a stark contrast to the Thalrix's organic grace. Ethan moved between the factions, acting as the bridge they so desperately needed. He translated the Thalrix's emotional expressions into terms the Zorvans could understand, and reframed the Zorvans' logic in ways that resonated with the Thalrix. It was exhausting work, but for the first time, he saw glimmers of cooperation. A Thalrix ripple was matched by a Zorvan tone. A Zorvan calculation was mirrored by a Thalrix shift in movement. But the tension remained. Both sides were still wary, their mistrust bubbling beneath the surface. As the ritual began, the chamber filled with an energy Ethan could only describe as electric. The Thalrix moved in synchrony, their tidal dance creating a hypnotic rhythm, while the Zorvans' harmonic frequencies resonated through the room. The two elements began to merge, the sound and motion weaving together in a way that felt almost magical. For a brief moment it seemed as though the ritual would succeed. Then chaos erupted. A Zorvan technician stumbled, disrupting the harmonic frequencies. The disruption sent a wave of discord through the chamber, jarring the Thalrix mid-dance. Calith's form flared red with anger, her voice sharp. "This is sabotage!" Zintha's visor flared, her tone defensive. "Impossible! Zorvans do not sabotage. The error was unintentional." The chamber descended into shouting, the fragile cooperation unraveling before Ethan's eyes. He stepped forward, raising his voice above the chaos. "Enough! Stop!" The room quieted, but the tension was palpable. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He couldn't let this fall apart. "It was an accident," he said firmly. "Nothing more. But if you let this moment define the ritual, then you've already failed. This was never going to be perfect. That's not the point. The point is that you're trying, that you're here together building something new." "Good morning," he began, his voice steady, despite the tension crackling in the air. "Yesterday we took a step forward. Today we take another. I prepared something that I believe can help us solidify this fragile peace." Zintha's visor tilted slightly, her tone sharp. "Elaborate human, we have no time for theatrics." Ethan suppressed a smile. "It's not theatrics, it's perspective. I propose a symbolic ritual blending elements from both cultures. A demonstration of unity, not just words on a treaty." Calith's form rippled with shades of curiosity. "A ritual? What would such a thing entail?" Ethan gestured to the holographic map, which shifted to display a stylized representation of the ritual. "The Thalrix will contribute their tidal dances, a sacred expression of connection to the waters. The Zorvans will provide harmonic frequencies to enhance the ritual's resonance, a reflection of their logical precision. Together, it will create something neither could achieve alone." The chamber murmured, the idea sparking a mixture of intrigue and skepticism. Zintha's visor flared faintly, a sign of processing. "Your proposal is inefficient. Rituals waste resources and yield no tangible benefit." Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's not about efficiency, it's about trust. Symbols matter. They bridge gaps logic alone can't. And trust me, if humans have learned anything, it's that sometimes a shared gesture can do more than 1,000 negotiations." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Ethan could feel his pulse hammering in his ears as he waited for their response. Finally, Calith spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "We will participate, human, if only to honor the memories of our ancestors. Zintha hesitated, her visor reflecting the glowing map. Logical analysis indicates a low probability of success. However, the potential benefits outweigh the risks. We will comply. Relief washed over Ethan, but he knew this was only the beginning. The ritual would require both factions to work together in real time, something they had never done before. And if even one side faltered, the fragile peace could crumble. Preparations began immediately. The Thalrix delegation set to work designing their tidal dance, their fluid forms gliding across the chamber in intricate patterns. Their movements were mesmerizing, ripples of light and color cascading through their bodies like waves. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of awe watching them, their connection to their environment so deeply ingrained it felt almost otherworldly. Meanwhile, the Zorvans calibrated their harmonic frequencies, their precision almost unnerving. Machines hummed as they adjusted each tone to perfection, their cold efficiency a stark contrast to the Thalrix's organic grace. Ethan moved between the factions, acting as the bridge they so desperately needed. He translated the Thalrix's emotional expressions into terms the Zorvans could understand, and reframed the Zorvans' logic in ways that resonated with the Thalrix. It was exhausting work, but for the first time, he saw glimmers of cooperation. A Thalrix ripple was matched by a Zorvan tone. A Zorvan calculation was mirrored by a Thalrix shift in movement. But the tension remained. Both sides were still wary, their mistrust bubbling beneath the surface. As the ritual began, the chamber filled with an energy Ethan could only describe as electric. The Thalrix moved in synchrony, their tidal dance creating a hypnotic rhythm, while the Zorvans' harmonic frequencies resonated through the room. The two elements began to merge, the sound and motion weaving together in a way that felt almost magical. For a brief moment it seemed as though the ritual would succeed. Then chaos erupted. A Zorvan technician stumbled, disrupting the harmonic frequencies. The disruption sent a wave of discord through the chamber, jarring the Thalrix mid-dance. Calith's form flared red with anger, her voice sharp. "This is sabotage!" Zintha's visor flared, her tone defensive. "Impossible! Zorvans do not sabotage. The error was unintentional." The chamber descended into shouting, the fragile cooperation unraveling before Ethan's eyes. He stepped forward, raising his voice above the chaos. "Enough! Stop!" The room quieted, but the tension was palpable. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He couldn't let this fall apart. "It was an accident," he said firmly. "Nothing more. But if you let this moment define the ritual, then you've already failed. This was never going to be perfect. That's not the point. The point is that you're trying, that you're here together building something new." The chamber fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Slowly, Calith's form shifted to green, her anger subsiding. Zintha's visor tilted in acknowledgement. "Let's try again," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Together." The second attempt began. The room filled once more with the sound of harmonics and the fluid motion of the Thalrix's dance. This time, there was a tentative harmony, a fragile balance that grew stronger with each passing moment. As the ritual reached its peak, the chamber seemed to transform. The waves of light from the Thalrix's movements intertwined with the resonating tones of the Zorvans' frequencies, creating a spectacle that was both mesmerizing and profound. For the first time, the two factions were truly in sync. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a symbol of what was possible, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. As the ritual ended, the chamber erupted in a wave of color and sound, a shared expression of awe. For the first time, both factions looked at each other not with mistrust, but with something resembling understanding. Ethan exhaled, the weight on his chest finally lifting. It wasn't a perfect solution. There was still much work to be done. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was all you needed. As the chamber emptied, Zintha approached him, her tone softer than he'd ever heard. "Your methods continue to defy logic, human. Yet, they yield results." Calith followed, her form glowing with soft blue light. "You have done what we thought impossible. Perhaps humans have more to teach us than we realized." Ethan smiled, exhaustion tugging at him. "We're all still learning." As he watched them depart, he allowed himself a rare moment of pride. The bridge was built, but the journey across it was just beginning. Ethan Calder stood at the center of the Vinorian Council chamber, his heart still racing from the ritual's success. The swirling lights of the Thalrix's tidal dance and the resonating tones of the Zorvans' harmonics had left an indelible mark on everyone present. For the first time since these negotiations began, hope hung in the air, tangible and fragile, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. But he knew better than to rest. A symbolic gesture was one thing, securing a lasting peace was another. "That was unexpected," Zintha said, breaking the silence. The Zorvan envoy's visor tilted toward Ethan, her tone devoid of its usual icy precision. "The ritual achieved coherence beyond calculated probability. Remarkable." Calith floated closer, her form glowing with soft blue hues of contemplation. "Perhaps not so remarkable. There is power in connection, in trust. Though I doubt the Zorvans will admit it openly," she added, a ripple of green humor coursing through her translucent body. Ethan chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Don't sell yourselves short. That wasn't just about trust. It was about effort. You both took a step, and that's what matters." Calith's colors deepened to a thoughtful green. "And yet gestures alone do not restore waters or rebuild bonds. Words and rituals cannot undo the damage that has been done." Zintha nodded, her voice sharp again. "Agreed. Logic dictates that further action must follow." Ethan raised his hands, drawing their attention. "That's why we're here. The ritual was the first step, but now it's time to solidify the path forward. Let's talk specifics, real compromises, real solutions." The negotiations resumed, this time with a palpable shift in tone. The hostility that had poisoned every prior session was replaced by cautious collaboration. Ethan facilitated the discussions with the same steady determination he'd honed through years of conflict resolution. This time, though, he didn't need to fight to keep them engaged. The Thalrix and Zorvans were finally listening to each other. Calith began, her voice heavy with emotion. "The waters are not merely resources. They are memory, a connection to those who came before us. To desecrate them is to erase our history." Zintha replied, her tone measured but less dismissive than before. "And yet, survival necessitates resource extraction. Without access, entropy accelerates, jeopardizing all species reliant on our outputs. A compromise must prioritize efficiency without complete restriction." Ethan nodded. "What if we combine those goals? A shared project, restoration and preservation of sacred sites, alongside sustainable resource management. Calith, your people could oversee the restoration, ensuring the water's sanctity. Zintha, your engineers could contribute precision technology to minimize disruption and maximize efficiency." The room fell silent as the two leaders considered his proposal. Finally, Calith's form rippled with soft greens and blues. "It is an acceptable start." Zintha's visor glinted faintly, her tone deliberate. "Analysis suggests a high probability of mutual benefit." "I concur." Ethan suppressed a grin. "Great. Now let's hash out the details." Hours passed as they worked through the finer points of the agreement. The process wasn't without its setbacks. Heated debates flared as cultural differences reared their heads. But each time, Ethan brought them back to the shared goal: survival. Bit by bit, a framework took shape. Sacred zones were designated as protected areas, while less sensitive regions were allocated for sustainable extraction. Joint oversight committees were established, with representatives from both factions ensuring accountability. By the time the final agreement was drafted, the tension in the room had given way to cautious optimism. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him, but a deep sense of satisfaction settled in his chest. "We've got a treaty," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Congratulations, you've done something incredible today." Calith's form shimmered with soft golds and greens, a rare display of gratitude. You underestimate your role, human. Without you, this would not have been possible. Zintha nodded, her tone uncharacteristically warm. Your methods were unconventional but effective. Humanity has demonstrated unexpected potential. Ethan smiled, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. Well, that's what we do. Surprising people is kind of our thing. The treaty was signed in a quiet ceremony, witnessed by Venorian mediators and a handful of galactic dignitaries. As the factions departed, their representatives exchanging tentative but genuine gestures of respect, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. The weight of the past days lifted, replaced by a quiet pride. Mira's voice chimed in his ear. Mission complete. Probability of sustained peace, 83%. Suggests celebration as the next logical step. Ethan laughed softly. You're starting to sound human, Mira. An unlikely hypothesis, Mira replied, but there was a faint lilt to her tone that Ethan swore sounded like amusement. That evening, Ethan found himself standing on a balcony overlooking Venoria's endless cityscape. The lights of the ships above mirrored the glow of the streets below, creating a tapestry of motion and color. The air was warmer now, carrying a faint floral scent that reminded him of spring on Earth. Calith approached, her form glowing faintly under the city's light. You look thoughtful, human. Ethan smiled, leaning against the railing. Just taking it all in. It's not every day you get to broker peace between alien species. Calith's colors deepened to a contemplative green. You have done more than that. You have shown us that even the most profound divides can be bridged. Zintha appeared moments later, her visor catching the light as she stepped beside them. Your species is peculiar. Emotion and logic intertwined, neither dominant yet both vital. It is a curious strength. Ethan looked between them, his smile widening. You know, I think that's what makes us human. We're messy, contradictory, and sometimes downright frustrating, but we find a way to make it work. Calith's glow softened to a warm gold. And in doing so, you remind us that survival is not merely existence. It is connection, legacy, growth. Zintha inclined her head. Your efforts here will not be forgotten. Humanity has earned a place among the stars. Ethan gazed out at the city, a sense of fulfillment settling over him. Well, I guess that's all we can ask for. As the night deepened, Ethan returned to his quarters, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He sank into the gelatinous chair, which adjusted to his weight with its familiar squish, and closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he felt at peace. Mira's voice broke the silence. Incoming message. Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. Can it wait? The sender is marked high priority, Mira replied. Message reads, The galaxy needs you again, human. Ethan opened his eyes, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, guess I won't be retiring anytime soon. He stood, stretching as the weight of the new challenge loomed ahead. But this time, he felt ready. The Thalrix and Zorvans had taught him something invaluable, that even the most impossible conflicts could be resolved if you had the courage to try. As he gazed out at the stars, Ethan whispered to himself, Let's see what's next. The galaxy waited, and so did he, ready to surprise them all over again.